Welcome to this PowerPoint about the chemical foundations of life. Living organisms are made of cells. Cells are the smallest living units, and they're made of molecules assembled in specific structures. Today we will review some of the basic knowledge about atoms and molecules so that we can better understand how molecules combine into the specific structures that make cells able to perform their tasks. Note that this is not a chemistry class, but it is rather a biology class which provides the minimal knowledge required to understand the biological properties of chemical and molecules. So let's first review what are atoms and molecules. So atoms or elements are pure substances that cannot be broken down further. It is interesting to remember that all the atoms make everything on Earth, so including non-living and living things. So basically it's not the nature of atoms making things that differs, but it's rather their quantities, their relative quantities. So for example, in the human body, like in every living organism, you will see that carbon is extremely present, while in non-living material, or for example on the Earth's crust, it is mostly silicon that replaces carbon. But overall, atoms are the same in living and non-living things. Now, when atoms connect together, it is called molecules. So when you have two or more atoms together, connected by the means of various types of bonds, you can call it a molecule. Molecules can be made because atoms have specific properties. And atoms are made up of two different parts. The first part being the nucleus. You can say nuclei when plural. And a nucleus is itself made of smaller particles. We don't need to go that much into details, but remember that the particles are generally positive or neutral, so it gives a general positive charge to the nucleus. Around the central nucleus, you will see another type of particles which are negatively charged. These charged particles are called electrons, and because they are negative, they stay around the positively charged nucleus. However, it is very difficult to say at any given moment where a specific electron is located, but we can locate them around in fact on a specific path that is usually circular, and this path is called an orbital. So while we cannot give a precise location, we can give a path on which we can find a given electron. Orbitals can accept up to 2 electrons, which means that if you have more than 2 electrons, you will have more than one orbital. And in the example shown here on the picture, you see that there are 6 electrons, so you will have several orbitals. Now, orbitals can be located close to the nucleus for electrons which have a relatively small amount of energy, or they can be located further away to the nucleus if the electrons circulating on these paths have a higher level of energy. So the rule that you have to remember is that for electrons, if they are further to the nucleus, it means that they have a higher energy level. This will give them a very interesting property, which is the fact that they will be able to interact with other atoms. Because of their high energy level, they are extremely reactive, and this is how they will be able to form bonds and interactions with other atoms and therefore form molecules. So this is what we will see in the next slide. So here we have an example given in the picture, which is the formation of an hydrogen molecule from two hydrogen atoms. So this type of bond is a specific type of bond where one atom, like the hydrogen atom here, has one electron located on a peripheral orbital, and the electron that is located on this peripheral orbital will be able to form a new orbital when combining with the electron of the second hydrogen atom. So basically what will happen is that the two electrons of the single hydrogen atoms will combine and start to move on a same path, which is called the molecular orbital, and this path is located around the two nuclei, so around the two hydrogen nuclei. This will be what will form the covalent bond. This type of bond, called covalent, is the strongest type of bonds. um, it is called covalent because it involves electrons that are located on the outermost layer of electrons, and these electrons are called valence electrons. They have a high energy level, and they are able to enter in the formation of covalent bonds. This is what forms molecules. Because they are very strong, it will take a chemical reaction to be able to disrupt a covalent bond. Now, you can have also special cases. We have seen previously that atoms don't necessarily all have the same size. You have big atoms and small atoms, and covalent bonds can occur between same atoms or between different atoms. So, for example, in the slide here, you can have covalent bond made between an oxygen and hydrogen atoms, like in the molecule of water. See, the oxygen atom in the molecule is the biggest atom. It is about 8 times bigger compared to the hydrogen atom. And what will happen is that because it is very big compared to the hydrogen atom, it will attract electrons more often, or most of the time basically, while hydrogen atoms will have electrons less often. And because electrons are negative, it will create a molecule that has an area that is more negative and an area that is more positive. So this will make a molecule that has a polarity, or basically a negative side and a positive side. So this is what we call a polar molecule, or a molecule with a polarity. And this is an important property because it can enter then in other reactions. So what we will see in a minute is that the hydrogen atoms that will carry the slight positive charge will be able to enter in connection with other molecules that have a negative charge. So if you look at water, like represented on the slide here, you see that one molecule of water, like we just saw, has its polarity as we just mentioned. So you have the slight positive charge of the hydrogen atoms, the slight negative charge of the oxygen atoms, and these atoms are able to connect with each other, so the negative side and the positive charge can enter in contact and form what we call the hydrogen bond. It's most often, in fact, it's always hydrogen atoms that are involved in such interactions because they are the smallest atoms possible in the world. So, this is why they can enter in polar covalent bond and create then interactions with other molecules of opposite charge. These interactions are relatively weak and they can be easily disrupted if you heat a bit the medium. So, for example, if you increase the temperature, it will generate it will disrupt a lot of the hydrogen bonds. So in the example given here again, you have water that can become gaseous water if you have less and less hydrogen bonds, and water is no more connected with other molecules of water, then it can evaporate. The third type of bond I wanted to cover with you is called ionic bonds, and it is when you have charged particles that can attract each other if they have opposite charges. So in the example that we have here, we can see the sodium chloride, which is basically the table salt, where you can see an atom of sodium. An atom of sodium regularly has 11 electrons, and a chlorine atom has regularly 17 electrons. However, what happens when they are put in contact is that the chlorine atom will steal or attract one of the electrons of the sodium atom. In fact, the sodium atom has one electron that is single on the outermost layer, and that is very likely to be stolen by anything else. So this electron, if it is lost, will generate a positive charge, because you will end up with a nucleus that is with 11 positive charges and only 10 electrons. So it is a bit the same thing for the chlorine atom. If instead of the 17 regular electrons that it normally has, if instead it has 18 when it receives the electrons from something else, then it will make a negative charge with the chlorine atom. When they are charged like that, after they've lost or gained one electron, they are called ion and no more atoms. They can stay stuck together by the mean of ionic bond, which is basically the attraction of a positive and a negative charge together. They can form salts like that, and these salts can be pretty tough and pretty strong. However, they can also be easily disrupted if you put with them another molecule that has a negative or a positive charge, like what we saw with water. So basically that's what happens when you put water with salt. You will have the negative charges of oxygen that will connect with the positive charges of sodium, and the positive charges of hydrogens connecting with the minus charges of the chlorine ion. So here again you see the electron that is single but stolen by the chlorine atom, and it will form the salt when the interaction between the plus and the minus is in contact. Now, the next interaction I wanted to mention is called the hydrophobic interaction, and it occurs when a substance which is extremely neutral will by all means avoid contact with a polar molecule. Because water is a polar molecule, it means that this substance will avoid contact with water. This is why we call it hydrophobic. It is basically water repellent. So because they avoid the contact with water, they will tend to cluster together and aggregate when they are put in contact with water. If in contrast you put them in a medium that is an organic solvent or something that is neutral like they will not tend to aggregate because they don't need to avoid the contact with the solvent. So hydrophobic interaction can be seen basically only when you are in an aqueous solution, and they occur between hydrophobic substances. Finally, the last type of interaction is called van der Waals interaction, and this is a type of interaction that looks a lot like the hydrogen bonds, and they occur between slight positive charges and slight negative charges of bigger molecules. So here you see you have a partial positive charge represented in blue, and that is in contact with a partial negative charge represented in red, and each individual interaction is relatively weak, but the sum of all the many interactions together, along with the complementarity of shape of the molecules, will make a pretty strong interaction. And as an example, I invite you to click on the link just below the title of this slide, and you will see an example of a biological process where van der Waals interactions are very important and give rise to a strong force despite the fact that they are individually pretty weak. So this closes the chapter on atoms, molecules, bonds, and interactions. And next time we will see the properties of water and organic molecules.